I keep coming back to that number. I read it 4 days ago and I have not been able to put it down since. 40%. 4 in 10 people who describe themselves as planning to retire when the time is right don't get to choose when that time is. They get forced out. A layoff, an injury, a health diagnosis, a company restructuring they didn't see coming. And the retirement they'd been sketching in their heads for years gets replaced by whatever is actually available to them in that specific moment when the choice gets made for them. Not the version with the project they'd been saving, not the version with the energy they'd been counting on. The version that lands when it lands, which is not when they planned. I've been sitting on that statistic for 4 days because I know exactly what it means. I got the buyout on a Tuesday, and I was out the door by Friday. 36 years. And I didn't choose the timing. The timing was chosen for me by a corporate restructuring I knew nothing about until the envelope arrived. I got lucky. The math worked out. I was 60. I was still moving okay. The Mustang was sitting in the garage, 90% done, and I finally had time to get back to it. That worked out. But it could have landed differently, and I know that. I have known that since the Tuesday the envelope arrived. My name is Mike Decker. I'm 62 years old. I spent 36 years as a maintenance technician and crew lead at an automotive parts manufacturing plant here in Rockford, Illinois. Hydraulics, pneumatics, electrical systems, CNC machinery, everything that kept the production lines running. I was the guy they called at 2 in the morning when line 4 went down. I took a buyout at 60, was out the door in 4 days, and I've been running the channel Beyond the Grind for a little over 14 months now, where I talk about what this transition actually looks like from inside it, not the brochure version, the version from the garage. If that kind of honest conversation is useful to you, subscribe. It helps me keep making these. Because here's the thing I want to talk about today, the reason that 40% number has been sitting heavy with me for 4 days. Most of the men I know who are still in the trades or still on plant floors are running the same calculation I ran for years. Wait a little longer, get a little more saved, get the kids through college, get the mortgage a little lower, get the pension solidified, get to the number. Wait until the time is right. And I understand that calculation. I ran it myself every year from 52 to 60. But there is something underneath that calculation that I don't think most of us are honest about, and it is this. Tomorrow is not guaranteed to look like you think it's going to look. And the body you're planning to retire into is not the body you're working in now. Let me try to lay this out the way I'd lay out a machine problem. What did the situation look like before, and what does it look like now? Before. The plant. The floor. Before retirement, my life had a structure that I didn't design and couldn't modify. The alarm was set for 4:45 because the shift started at 6 and I needed to be there early. The work week was the organizing principle of everything else. The weekends were recovery and preparation, not actual time. If something happened on the floor, my phone rang. At 2 in the morning on a Thursday, at 6 on a Saturday, it didn't matter. I was on call for 36 years in a way that is not casual. You get used to it. The urgency becomes normal. You stop noticing that almost all of your time is organized around responding to other people's emergencies. I did not notice that for most of my career. I noticed it 2 weeks after I left when I realized my phone had not rung once for work-related reasons, and I was still waking up at 4:45 out of pure muscle memory. The Mustang was already in the garage. I'd bought it in 2013 from an estate sale in Belvedere, 60% disassembled, partially stripped, barn stored for years, $4,000 on a trailer. I worked on it on weekends and the occasional evening for 9 years while I was still at the plant. That means 9 years of picking it up and putting it down, 9 years of progress measured in weekends, 9 years of working on something that was entirely mine, with whatever time the plant left over after it was done with me. I had the engine rebuilt in 2018. I did the bodywork myself over 2 winters. Progress was real. It was also slow in a way I accepted because I had no other choice. Here is the split that I want you to sit with. That same car, that same project, that same man. After the buyout, in month 1 of retirement, I was in the garage by 7 every morning. I worked until noon, had lunch, went back until 4 or 5. The Mustang that had been a weekend project for 9 years became, in the first weeks of retirement, the thing I got up for. Not because I was more talented or more motivated, because the time was actually mine, all of it. No production schedule, no emergency calls, no week that had already taken what it needed from me before I got to the garage. The difference in output was not incremental, it was a different thing entirely. That is what time actually costs. Not the money version, the other version, the bandwidth version, the you still have something left in the tank version. Now I want to go back and look at 40, because this is where the tenderness gets complicated, and I think it's worth being honest about it. When I was 40, I made crew lead at 38, and I was 2 years into running the crew, training the younger techs, which I was better at than I expected to be. I had been at the plant for 14 years. Jason was 11 or 12 years old. Karen was working the same dental hygienist job she still works now. The house was 10 years into a 30-year mortgage. The picture looked like this. I was essential at work. I was needed at home. I was good at what I did. There was no version of retirement anywhere on the actual horizon. That was fine. I wasn't looking for it. But here is what 40-year-old Mike did not know. He did not know that he was running on a timeline that his body was also running on, and that those two timelines were not synchronized the way he assumed they were. He thought, work until the number, then retire, then have the life. Linear. You finish the job and then you get the rest of it. What he didn't account for, what I didn't account for, is that the body doesn't wait for the pension to solidify. It keeps going on its own schedule while you're waiting for the right time. The maintenance tech version of this is something I understand in my bones. In industrial maintenance, there's a failure mode called deferred maintenance. You know something needs attention. You know the bearing is running a little warm, the seal is starting to weep, the belt is showing wear. But the line is running and the schedule doesn't have room for a planned shutdown right now, so you defer it. You'll get to it. The machine keeps running, and often it's fine. You get to it before the failure, you do the maintenance, no problem. But sometimes you defer it one cycle too many, and the bearing doesn't just fail, it takes out something else on the way down. The repair you could have done in a 4-hour planned shutdown becomes a 48-hour emergency. Deferred maintenance is always a gamble on timing that you don't fully control. I am not saying our bodies are machines. I am saying that 40-year-old Mike was deferring some maintenance on himself that he didn't notice he was deferring. He assumed there would be good years on the other side of the work years. He was right about that. But he was assuming those years would be there whenever he decided to claim them. The statistic that has been with me for 4 days is not just about the 40% who lose the choice entirely. It's about the math underneath it. If you retire at 62 with moderate health and no major complications, studies put your healthy, active years, the years where you are physically capable of doing the things you were planning to do, at roughly 10 to 15 years. 12 if you're being honest about the average. That's the window. If you retire at 67, which is where a lot of men I know are targeting, you've just handed back 5 years of that window. Not to savings, not to security, to a job that will continue running without you, the same way the plant is running without me right now, which I know and have processed and am fine with, but which is also just true. Phil, my neighbor, retired electrician, 3 years ahead of me in this, told me something in about month 3 that I have thought about many times since. He said, "The plant will be there. The project won't wait the same way." He wasn't talking about the Mustang specifically. He was talking about the energy. He said by the time he retired, he could still do everything he'd planned to do, but the version of himself that did it was not the version he'd been picturing when he made the plan. The doing was right. The doing it the way he'd imagined was gone by about 3 years. The knees, the back, the recovery time. All of it functional, none of it the same as the picture. Phil is not a cautionary tale. He is retired, he is functional, he does the things he planned. But the specific conversation that has stayed with me is when he described a fishing trip he'd been planning for decades. Up into Wisconsin, the kind of weekend a man thinks about for years as the thing he's going to do when he has time. He did it. He went. It was good. And then he said, very plainly, that if he had done it at 58 instead of 65, he would have been able to hike into the spot he actually wanted to fish, instead of the spot that was accessible from the parking area. Not because he can't walk, because the walk that would have been uncomfortable at 58 was not realistic at 65. That's it. That's the whole story. He got the trip. He got a different version of the trip than the one he'd been planning. I heard that story and I thought about the Mustang. I thought about the fact that for 9 years, the bodywork on that car was something I wanted to do myself. I did it. 2 winters in the garage, grinding and filling and blocking and priming. My hands remember what that felt like. I was 60 when I did it. My body cooperated. But I think about the version of me that does that work at 64 or 65, after another 4 or 5 years of what industrial maintenance does to your back and your knees, and the grip strength you stop noticing declining until you notice it. I don't know that that version of me gets the same result. I don't know that the work comes out the same. I am glad I got to find out at 60 and not 65. There was a man on my crew, Gary, been there 28 years, pneumatics specialist, genuinely one of the best diagnosticians I ever worked with, who talked about retirement constantly from about 55 on. His plan was 63, then 64. Then he was going to do 1 more year because his daughter was getting married and he wanted the insurance. Then 1 more because the grandson was on the way. Then 1 more because the market was down. He finally retired at 67. He had the plan. He had the number. He kept moving it because there was always a reason that was real enough to justify it. He retired at 67, healthy enough to do what he'd planned. I don't know the end of his story. I hope it's a good one. But I think about those 4 years he gave away and what they were made of. 4 more years of 20 years left. Not neutral years. Years. I took the buyout, as I said, not entirely by choice. The timing was made for me. But I want to be direct about something. If the timing had not been made for me, if the envelope had not arrived on that Tuesday, I had been telling myself I would work 3 more years. I had reasons, solid reasons, the reasons that everyone has. And I want to think honestly about what those 3 years would have cost me, not in the money sense, but in the other sense. 3 more years on the floor means 3 more years of 4:45 alarms, 3 more years of the phone ringing at 2 in the morning, 3 more years of a body that was already showing what 30-plus years of industrial maintenance does to joints and soft tissue and sleep. I was functional. I was good at my job. I was not the same man physically that I'd been at 40, and I was not going to get that back. The 3 years I was planning to keep giving to the plant were not neutral years. They were the first 3 years of the window Phil was describing, and I would have spent them on the floor, and the floor would have been fine either way, because the floor always is. That is not bitterness about the job. I was good at it, and I knew it, and that mattered. 36 years of knowing you're good at what you do is not nothing, but it is also not the same as knowing you're good at what you do for yourself, and I had not had much practice at that until the buyout gave it to me. The Mustang is 90% done. My son Jason, who has been hearing 6 more months for 2 years, treats that estimate with the skepticism it has earned, and he's not wrong to. But here is what I want to say about that. I'm not in a hurry. That is genuinely new. For 36 years I ran on other people's schedules, other people's production targets, other people's emergencies. The Mustang has no production schedule. Nobody's line goes down if I get the carburetor wrong. I have been working on machines for my entire adult life, and I had no idea how much of what I did was shaped by urgency until the urgency was gone. That is not a metaphor I designed. That is just what happened. Karen still works. She's got 2 more years before she retires, and I will be honest with you. I think about that constantly in a way I don't fully know what to do with yet. When she retires, will be the first time in our entire marriage that we've both been home full time at the same time. Never happened. She has been a dental hygienist for 23 years at the same practice, and she is good at it, and she knows exactly who she is in that building. And I was that person too, for 36 years. And I know what it costs to figure out who you are when you leave. I am watching her prepare for that with a specific kind of attention, the kind you pay to something that matters and that you can't fully fix in advance. I am trying to figure out how to be useful to that process before it arrives. Phil says you can't really be ready for it, you just have to get there and pay attention. Phil is usually right about these things. I'm trying anyway. But here is why Karen's retirement in 2 years is relevant to this conversation. She decided. She set the date. 2 more years, then out. She did not say when the time is right. She said, this is the number I'm working toward, and I'm going to get there. And watching her do that, watching someone make the decision as a decision rather than a condition, has clarified something for me about how I think about the years I nearly gave away without deciding to give them. I was 36 years on the floor because of a combination of genuine ability, genuine need, and genuine inertia. The first 2 were real. I want to be honest about the third one. Inertia is real, and it is not the same as good reasons. I had good reasons too, but some of what kept me working past 55 was just that work was the structure, and leaving the structure required a decision, and decisions require admitting that something is going to change, and that is uncomfortable in a specific way that is very easy to manage by not making the decision yet. Tomorrow is a lie, not my phrase. It's the thumbnail on this video, and when I read it, I recognized it immediately. Not because it's poetic, but because it's mechanically accurate. The tomorrow where you have the project and the energy and the time to do it right, that tomorrow is built out of assumptions about the body you'll have, and the health you'll maintain, and the circumstances that will hold. Some of those assumptions are going to be right. 40% of the time, at minimum, they won't be. So here's where I land on this, and I want to be concrete about it, because I don't think I'm useful to anyone if I just describe the problem. If you're in your late 50s and you've been running the when the time is right calculation, the first thing I'd suggest is to actually write down what the target is. Not in your head, on paper. The actual number, the actual date, the actual conditions. Because in my experience, and this is not financial advice, this is the experience of a man who deferred this for years. When you write it down and look at it, you can usually see how much of it is real requirement and how much of it is inertia wearing the costume of responsibility. Second thing, talk to someone who is 3 years ahead of you in this, the way I talk to Phil. Not a financial planner. I mean someone who has actually made the transition and will tell you what they didn't expect, the things that got harder, the things that got better than they thought. Phil didn't tell me retirement was easy. He told me it was real, in a way that was different from how I'd been thinking about it, and that specificity was useful. I made half the mistakes he warned me about anyway, but at least I recognized them when they arrived. Third thing, and this is the one that I resisted the longest. The project, the thing you've been waiting for, whatever your version of the Mustang is, it is not going to wait indefinitely in the condition you're expecting it to be in. Not the project, you. The version of you that gets to do the thing you've been waiting to do has a window, and that window is not as elastic as the waiting feels like it is. I went to the Votech at the local high school about 14 months ago. A teacher there called me on a recommendation, asked if I'd come in once to talk to some juniors and seniors heading into trades, basic mechanical and electrical troubleshooting. I went once expecting to hate it. I've been going every week for 14 months. I still don't fully understand what that means about me. Probably something I should have figured out 30 years ago. But I'm here now, and the kids are 17, and they ask questions I don't always have clean answers for, and that turns out to be exactly what I needed. That's what I want to leave you with today. Not a guarantee, Not a promise that retirement is going to be what you've been picturing, but an honest account from inside it, from a man who nearly gave away 3 years he didn't need to give, and who is sitting in his garage 2 years in with the Mustang 90% done, and the mornings genuinely his for the first time in his adult life. The question I keep sitting with, and I'd like to know if you've sat with it too, is this. If you could go back and have a real conversation with the version of yourself at 40, the one who thought there was plenty of time, and who was good at his job, and who had the project sitting in the garage or in his head waiting for the right moment, what would you actually tell him? Not what you should tell him, what you'd actually say. Leave that in the comments if you have an answer, because I've been thinking about what I'd tell 40-year-old Mike for 2 years now, and I'm still not sure I've got it right.